This video is part of Electronics Level 1, and this is activity number 4, in which we're going to look at printed circuit boards and identifying components. To go to this activity and the others at this level, visit jb.works and use the TMT code shown at the bottom by placing it in the search prompt at the website, and you'll be taken to these activities. The purpose of this video is to accompany activity 4 and just to help you guys find parts and get used to what they're like. And in that video, or rather in this activity, you look at PCBs. So I thought it would be a good idea to look at what used to be around before PCBs. And this is it. Basically what you had are all the components are literally connected to each other. So they're all soldered together. So this is a resistor, it's another resistor, these are capacitors. And notice they're basically islands, and on the other side of each one of these holes would be a valve. And so the parts were connected together using wires. They were soldered directly in many cases. And you've got a lot of empty space that's not used. So all of this is basically what's called a chassis. It's like a big metal case. And this is technology from the early 1900s, probably right up to the 1940s and 50s. Now, in the last picture, I was saying that there were the round circles and then there were valves. So these are valves, these big glass tubes. And this is an old style radio. And you can see it's enormous. It's probably at least over a foot wide, probably a foot deep. So this is a radio that today would be, well, a cell phone does a bazillion times more than this. And look how tiny it is compared with this thing here. And they weighed a ton. Lots and lots of metal, wires. Everything's very, very basically big. So technology has come a long way. So next, we're going to start looking at some PCBs, which are printed circuit boards. Now, before we go on, one of the first questions you need to answer is what actually is a PCB? So this is a PCB, and so is this. So first of all, PCB stands for printed circuit board. So this is a board, and if you look on the back side, there are actually tracks or wires printed onto the back in copper. So literally, this is a circuit that's been printed onto a board, which is why they're called printed circuit boards. So if we look at the top, this was like a solar system thing that one of my kids made. And basically you've got things like LEDs. These are capacitors. And you've got resistors here. And you've got some transistors. There, these guys. And they're all mounted on this phenolic board. And then if I turn it over, the connections between each of the parts are accomplished using lines of copper that are printed on the board. And you can see that the pins poking through are soldered together. So this is a printed circuit board. You have a board and you have parts on top that are soldered onto it and held in place by the board. Before we get started, let's just review the various electronic parts that we're going to be looking for. So the first one is a resistor, and that's this guy here. Now on this table we have the surface mount versions as well as the through hole versions. These are capacitors which store charge. That's a light emitting diode. These are normal diodes. And these are transistors here. And finally we have things called integrated circuits, and they're basically collections of tens of thousands, even up to millions or billions of transistors. So now that we know what the parts look like, we'll have a look at some example PCB boards. Right, this is the first board we're going to look at. It's an old board, which is good because all the parts are very big and easy to see. And I think this one is some kind of amplifier or part of a power supply. So the first thing we've got are circles showing the number of parts. So these are resistors, so everything with a 1 on it is a resistor. So these are resistors, those are resistors there. And you see they're different sizes as well. And then you've got capacitors. So that's what these guys are here. They're all capacitors. This is a capacitor. That one, that's a big capacitor. Next we have diodes. And there's a diode right here. That's a diode, and so is that. And diodes basically will only allow current to go in one direction. Capacitors are used to store charge briefly. And of course, resistors resist the travel of current, or resist the flow of current. Then we have transistors, number 6. So these are transistors. And notice how they're in metal cans. And in those days, that was how they did it. They actually built them in metal cans. And finally, we have a transformer, which we haven't talked about before, but basically it uses a lot of copper wire wound around itself to convert one type of AC voltage into another type of AC voltage. So this is the PCB board, is the whole thing that holds all of the parts. And you can see these faint areas in the back here, they are the copper tracks. They are the tracks that link up the parts. So you can see from this capacitor here, it goes down through the board, and then there's a copper track that brings it back to somewhere under here. So this is a nice old PCB board. This next PCB is of a child's walkie-talkie. And what we'll do is we'll start off with the resistors. So there should be about 15. Now the resistors are these guys here. These are resistors, and the job of the resistors is to block or constrain the flow of current. Then we should have capacitors. So these little orange guys, these are all capacitors. And so are these two electrolytics down here in the bottom right hand corner. And then we have 4 transistors. So we have one here, and then we have the other 3 are over here. We have one button, which is this big blue guy, and one variable resistor, and that's this round device. And what that does is it controls the volume that you hear through the speaker, which is located over here. Then we have a transformer, or several transformers. So these are 2 radio frequency transformers. You see they've got windings of copper wire. And then this is an audio transformer, which is used to drive the speaker. And finally, we have various wires. So that's these here. And these 2, like the red and the black one here, they take the power from the battery. And then these other ones operate various things like buttons and the speaker, etc. So this is a simple PCB of a child's walkie-talkie. And the PCB itself is the brown board. Now this is the last PCB that we'll look at in this video. And this one's good because it gives you an example of a modern PCB. The previous 2 we looked at were relatively old, and they were all through-hole, as in all of the parts went through the PCB. This board has a lot of surface mount parts, like these ones here, and like this guy. And the reason that they're called surface mount parts is because they are attached to the surface of the PCB, literally glued on with solder paste. So if we look at the list, we've got resistors. So on the face of it, there don't seem to be that many resistors, but there are actually a lot, but they're all surface mounts. So these are all resistors, tiny little chip resistors. Capacitors, 20 of those. So aside from these 2 big ones and these guys here, there don't seem to be that many capacitors. But this is a capacitor, that's a capacitor, this is another capacitor. So these are all surface mount capacitors. They sit on the surface of the board. Light emitting diodes. So on the front of the board, because it's a network switch, there are lots of light emitting diodes there, but there are none on the surface here that we can see. Diodes, so this is a diode here, and the other diode is, where is the other one? Here. These are diodes. It says in terms of transistors there are only 1, which is number 6, which is a surface mount transistor. But this board actually contains hundreds of millions of transistors, but they're all inside integrated circuits, like this one here, and like these guys, and finally in this big module here. So they will have all the transistors inside them. The button is right here, so this is for resetting it. The integrated circuits are, again, these guys. So these are integrated circuits here. And you've got a transformer, which is this toroid here. And you've got two things called crystals. Now the crystals are right here, and the other crystal is over here. And basically what crystals are very accurate clocks that can produce a very accurate clock signal that the electronics need so that it can keep in time with itself. And the printed circuit board is this green board that everything's mounted on. So this is the printed circuit board itself. And if I zoom in, you can see all of these tracks, lots and lots of tracks. And these are equivalent to wires. So you can see we've got a track here that goes all the way around here and connects this chip here. So that's a track between this chip and this chip. So instead of having physical wires like this one here, which are very big, you've got tiny little tracks. And if you compare the width of this wire, you can tell that in the space occupied by this one wire, over here we've got at least 3 or 4 of them. And these are printed on the surface of the PCB board. For more information, visit jb.works.